Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm very, very pleased to be able to welcome you here at this room. And I believe there are several more people still coming in later today. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you at Khayirion's second annual conference titled Transiting MENA Disorder, Political, Social, and Economic Impacts. I'm sorry, I can never remember these names. As we promised last year during our first conference held in cooperation with Comenius University in Bratislava, Khayrion's annual gatherings will rotate among the capitals or among the various universities of Visegrad 4 countries, ideally always in partnership with a distinguished academic institution. So here we are today at the University of Public Service, and next year I hope the University of Łódź is still on. Thank you very much. We are really proud and delighted to be collaborating with the National University of Public Service. And as you can already see, the level of organization is very different from what it was last year. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Zachar Péter, Farkas Noémi, Tódor Mónika, Rigó Judit, the university's technical staff, and of course, Professor Erzsébet Nagyné Rózsa for facilitating this entire opportunity. So thank you. I also owe deep gratitude to my senior researchers, not just Professor Nagyné Rózsa, but also Professor László Csicsman, who cannot be here with us today because he's at the Doha Forum, together with Ahmed Ashara, to my great pain. And of course, His Excellency György Busztin, for their essential role for organizing this event, all the support and great advice they have given me throughout the entire organization process. Sorry. And I must give a very, very special thanks to Alexandra Risch, who handled all the organizational tasks. Without her, you would have no certificates, no programs, no name tags, just maybe a bag of my tears, but certainly not more. So thank you very much, Alexandra, for everything you have put into this. And another great thanks goes to my husband, who's not here, but for all the patience he's had with me during the intense weeks prior to this event, also for cutting up the name tags. It's a family cooperation. Most of you know that I'm not exactly a natural public speaker, and you know I always prefer leaving the limelight for somebody who deserves it more. But please allow me to reflect on Khayrion's roughly 2 years of existence. Things have certainly not unfolded the way we planned. We had very clear, very precise ideas about how we want to move on, what are the plans, what are all the ideas that we'd like to accomplish, and we had a pretty precise way of how to do it, yet reality kicked in. The path turned out to be quite different, and we achieved very different things from what we imagined in the first year of our existence. In networking and bringing together researchers from our field, from the Visegrad 4 countries and well beyond, welcome Ida again. I think we have done a much better job than we would have imagined at the beginning. In terms of structural expansion, honestly, we hoped we would be further along by now, but we're working on it. Of course, one of the major questions is funding. We're working on it, and even though at certain points Khayrion's foundations felt really shaky, we endured, and we are ready to keep moving along. What brings me the greatest joy is that only 2 years after our funding, Khairion is already recognized within the Central Eastern European region as a relevant partner for discussion within the Middle Eastern studies. And we are not only respected by world-renowned experts, but we're also able to offer space for emerging talents. It's a great honor to welcome leading figures such as James and Dorsey and Giorgio Cella to be our keynote speakers for the event. But it's also a privilege to watch the growth of young colleagues like the aforementioned Alexandra Risch, who I'm certain will be shaping our fields in the year to come. It is also a great honor to work alongside my senior researchers, Professor Erzsébet Nagyné Rózsa, Professor László Csicsman, and His Excellency György Busztin, while it's also a pleasure to support the development of our junior researchers, Hessam Habibidoro and Alexandra Risch. Today is also the perfect moment to introduce the newest member of our team, lead researcher Elias Dahrouj. Please, let's make it truly formal. We have collaborated with Elias for quite some time now, and I am delighted to formalize this cooperation on this occasion. Thank you very much for joining our team. As for the conference program, I'm truly excited. Like last year, we will have stimulating contributions from both established scholars and rising experts. And this year, we will be representing speakers from 13 countries, if I did my math right. If I'm wrong, please correct me. Math has never been my strong suit. I would also like to thank Omar Saifo, who is not here yet, and I'm not sure if he's going to appear. Milan Rokos, who will come in the afternoon, and especially Elias for facilitating contact for the speakers for panels 5 and 6, scheduled for tomorrow. Initially, I kind of hesitated about including professionals who do not come from a purely academic background. But after a number of discussions I've had with my team, we agreed that experts such as Dia Bara from the UNDP in Damascus, Lina Houtouk and Amira Malik from Syrian NGOs, and Bara Uthman from the Syrian Journalist Union, that's going to be a good one, would offer unique and essential perspectives on the urgent topic of Syria's reconstruction, and probably offer insights that we would not be able to generate on our own. No matter how deep our factual knowledge is, this warm and elegant room is not the place where you can truly understand the depth of Syria's problems at the moment. Regarding the practicalities, you know where the coffee is served. I have the lunch tickets. We'll have lunch at the university restaurant. They're with me. For those of you who have presentations, please hand them to Mr. Tibor in the back, either on a USB key or send them by email. And if you have any questions concerning the organizational aspects of the conference, I'm here. As for the program, you may have noticed that we changed the opening session from a keynote speech to a keynote discussion. This was the suggestion of James M. Dorsey, who, in the humble style characteristic for truly brilliant minds, asked, who wants to look at a talking head for 45 minutes? So we opted for a roundtable format with space for questions and comments from the audience. So please feel free to join in. We believe it's a fitting way to begin a conference rooted in Khayirion's mission, working together for everyone involved, and I will probably sound a little pathetic, but for the greater good for everybody involved. So thank you very much, and let's begin the conference. Get our papers published in one of those, either with Ludwika University or any other university that they have academic journals. From my side, sites and yeah, we can create like a special issue for all the presenters that they can present their papers in, and that would be available. I think this was discussing the university was, and I believe that can be doable next year, right? Here, I think that all the monographs after conferences. So this is our bulk of operation. So I know how it will be next year when my colleagues in Poland will be.
Yeah, I'm about to start. What? Have you used it already? Try it now. Because it's about to start in a minute.
Is this thing on? Yes, it's on. So, thank you again. I believe we can start with the keynote discussion now. Please, everybody, welcome James and Dorsey, the author of The Turbulent World and one of the greatest experts in our field globally. Thank you. Thank you, James, for being with us.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I wish you and the audience a great conference. And it's wonderful to see György at least, or see György again, at least virtually.
Thank you very much. If there's anything who doesn't know my senior researcher, His Excellency György Busztin, former ambassador and a great expert on Middle Eastern studies too. So welcome and thank you very much for joining this discussion.
James, absolutely great to see you again. We are delighted to have you with us. It has become a tradition with Khayiron to open our deliberations with you. I very much appreciate that despite the time difference and all your engagements, and we know there are many, you took the time off to be with us. And we are looking forward to hearing from you. I just want to make it known to the audience that James is not only concerned with the affairs of the Middle East, but he is also an expert on Southeast Asia. And when I was working with him in Singapore, I had the privilege of benefiting from his amazing knowledge over both Southeast Asia and the Middle East and the rest of the world. And I have to say that we are blessed to have him with us and to hear from him about our current affairs and about the topics that are of our main concern. James, thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
György, that's very generous. I must warn you, however, you institutionalize me at your peril.
Thank you very much. So I believe we can start. Gentlemen, what do you consider the most crucial recent developments shaping the current situation in the Middle East? James?
I would focus on several things. One is the evolution of the relationship between the United States and Israel, which is going to significantly impact the future of Gaza and how the Gaza issue is resolved, the future of Palestinian national aspirations, as well as Israel's relationships with both its neighboring states, including Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, but also with the broader Middle East and the broader Muslim world. The second thing I would look at is the evolution of the way Saudi Arabia is positioning itself in an emerging new world order. I think the key here is that Saudi Arabia sees itself as nearly, not quite, but nearly on par with the major powers, China, the United States, India, presumably, particularly with given the development of, or the importance, the growing importance of issues like artificial intelligence and critical mineral resources. The third thing I would look at is how Iran is going to evolve. The change is coming in Iran. You have a supreme leader who is nearing his 90s, reportedly is not in the best of health. And you have the changes that have occurred in Iran's status as a result of the last 2 years of conflict in the Middle East. And the final issue I would look at is the black swan, if you wish, which is regime stability across the Middle East.
Okay, thank you. So maybe we can start with the U.S.-Israel relations. How do you think they're evolving? How would you characterize the changes that are going on at the moment?
I think what we've seen is several things. First of all, since the return of Donald Trump to the Oval Office, we've seen a number of points at which Trump and Netanyahu have differed, whether that is on Turkey, whether that is on Iran, and various other issues. What we've seen in the last few days is increased pressure by Trump on Netanyahu with regard to Syria, with regard to Lebanon, and also with regard to Gaza. How that is all going to crystallize, I think, will become clear with two things. One is the expected announcement of the composition of a Palestinian committee of nonpartisan Gazans that would run the day-to-day affairs of Gaza under the supervision of a board of peace that would be headed by Trump himself. And the upcoming visit to Washington at the end of this month by Netanyahu. This is Netanyahu's fifth visit since Trump's return to the Oval Office. No other leader has visited the White House 5 times. So I think you can conclude from the summoning of Netanyahu to return to Washington that Trump means business. I think added to that are shifts which are crucial within the Make America Great Again and the evangelical support base of the US president. What you're seeing there is mounting criticism of Israel, greater empathy for the Palestinian issue, particularly among evangelical youth, and a rise, I think one also has to note, a rise of anti-Semitism. In other words, Trump will be keen to listen to what his base says, even though he has said, I invented America first, I define what America first means. And at the third factor, I think, in influencing US policy is the increased importance of the Gulf states, which relates to what I was earlier saying about Saudi Arabia. And the key there is that Saudi Arabia is positioning itself as a major artificial intelligence hub. And also Saudi Arabia increasingly is emphasizing its mineral resources, not just its fossil fuel reserves, and sees that as a way of positioning itself as a global power. So that gives the Saudi Arabia, but also other Gulf states, particularly the United Arab Emirates and Qatar, greater influence and greater leverage in Washington. And it is clear that the Gulf states, for a variety of reasons, even if they may not really or truly care about the plight of the Palestinians, need a resolution to the Palestinian issue.
Thank you. You have just taken my question. What do you think Saudi Arabia is actually aiming for in its negotiations with the US? What do you think is Saudi Arabia's ultimate goal within its regional policy?
I think that the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, walked away from his visit to Washington in November with a feeling of having been extremely successful. Trump has basically bought into the Saudi Crown Prince's ambition to position the kingdom as a key international player. The interesting part of that is that for the Crown Prince to achieve his objectives, he has become, in a sense, to a greater extent dependent on the United States. With other words, the positioning in terms of artificial intelligence depends on those contracts that were signed in Washington while the Crown Prince was there with U.S. companies. Exploiting Saudi Arabia's advantages in terms of being a data center hub is again locks Saudi Arabia in with the United States. Saudi Arabia positioning itself as the refining and processing hub at the crossroads of Europe, Africa, and Asia, as the refining and processing hub for critical minerals, is again in cooperation with the United States. So what you're seeing is a relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States that is increasingly mutually beneficial. The United States needs Saudi Arabia in terms of diversifying its critical mineral supplies. Keep in mind that critical minerals are not only important for issues like mobile phones, but also for a whole series of U.S. weaponry, including the F-35s, including Virginia-class submarines, Tomahawk missiles, and we can go down the list.
Thank you. György, would you like to add something?
Oh, yes, James, let us pick your brain on a topic that I'm sure you can tell us a lot about. We grew up in a world where it has become commonly accepted that Egypt is the leading force of the Arab world. Nothing happened without Egypt. Nothing happened without the blessing of Egypt. And it seems to us that this latest visit of Mohammed bin Salman to Washington brought a kind of tectonic change to this perception. I wonder whether you agree if I say that Saudi Arabia has emerged, almost ceremoniously emerged, as the leading force of the Arab world with this visit.
The answer, I think, is yo. That is to say, yes and no. With other words, Egypt is the most populous Arab country. It has a battle-hardened military and has a geographically strategic position at the crossroads between Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. It's a Mediterranean country, but it lost a lot of its influence following the visit in 1977 by the then Egyptian president Anwar Sadat to Israel, which was unprecedented at the time, and then subsequently the first Israeli-Arab peace treaty, which was with Egypt in 1979. Egypt has never really recovered its position since, and it's hard for Egypt to compete with a country like Saudi Arabia, given the fossil fuel reserves of Saudi Arabia and its importance in the oil market, but also the financial muscle that Saudi Arabia has as a result of its oil revenues, and finally its position as the custodian of the two Muslim holy cities, Mecca and Medina. Egypt has crawled back a little bit in terms of its role as a mediator in the Gaza conflict, but it hasn't recovered its position. I think the last thing I would say on that is that, harking back to Saudi Arabia's strategy, as a matter of principle, Mecca and Medina and money aren't good enough in terms of a sustainable leadership of the Muslim or of the Arab world, at least. In that sense, the diversification strategy that Mohammed bin Salman has developed with his Vision 2030, but also as it was expanded on during his visit to Washington last month, may make it indeed more sustainable.
Thank you. If I may go a bit further, and evidently this is something that has probably garnered a lot of attention the world over. There was a competition between the Gulf states for the favor of the United States before this historic visit, I can say, of Mohammed bin Salman to Washington. And we have seen the Emir of Qatar presenting a fancy airplane to President Trump, which created quite a controversy in the United States. I mean, this was just one sign of the emerging competition between the three key players of the Gulf for the favor of the United States. How do you see, will this competition go on? And if so, what will be the ramifications?
I think there's no doubt that Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar will be both cooperating and competing, certainly in terms of access and favor in the United States. They've had different strategies. So, in my mind, Saudi Arabia has clearly, and the Crown Prince has clearly hooked his future or his vision for the future of Saudi Arabia to the United States. Now, that is not to say that they're going to break relations with China or Russia, but the central focus, and the Saudis have made that very clear, is Washington. Qatar has done the same, but it's focused much more on the security relationship, the mediation relationship that they have. They're not positioning their country as an artificial intelligence hub or a critical minerals hub, but they have in fact, if you go back to the 2017 Saudi UAE-led boycott of Qatar, in which Trump, in his first term, initially seemed to favor the Saudi UAE position, that very quickly changed. And during the 3.5-year boycott, Qatar very successfully tightened its relations with the United States, leading to it becoming a non-NATO major ally of the United States, even before Saudi Arabia. The Emiratis are a bit more circumspect, also because in many ways, if you want to express it that way, they play a lot dirtier. Look at the conflicts in Yemen and Sudan, for example. I think one litmus test of the UAE-US relationship will be whether the Emiratis will engage with the United States again on the sale of F-35 fighter jets. That sale was initially agreed upon as a matter of principle when the UAE, alongside Bahrain, Morocco, established diplomatic relations with Israel in 2020. The UAE suspended the talks on the purchase of the F-35s because of restrictions that the Americans were putting on the sale, including safeguards so that China would not have any access to technology associated with the F-35. Now that Saudi Arabia is getting 48 F-35s, I think we could see the revival of the F-35 sales to Turkey. It could very well be that the UAE will not want to be left out of that.
Thank you. Where does China position itself within this entire mosaic?
China positions itself as a neutral partner and as an economic partner. China has at various points taken a stab at mediation in the Middle East. Most of those mediations, certainly with regard to the Palestinians, have failed. That is to say, there's been two nominal successes in my mind. One was the mediation in reestablishing relationships between Saudi Arabia, diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran in 2021, if I'm not incorrect. But that was handed to China on a silver platter. There had been 2 years of negotiations which did not involve China to get to the point where an agreement was possible. And I think that the Saudis and the Iranians were willing to throw the Chinese a bone by announcing the restoration of diplomatic relations in Beijing. The second nominal success is the Beijing Declaration that was issued after Hamas and Al-Fatah, the backbone of the West Bank-based Palestine Authority, met in Beijing, issued a joint statement that was supposed to put their rivalry behind them. Fact of the matter is, we've seen those kind of statements before. There have been multiple meetings mediated by multiple players, and none of that has really led to a unification, if you will, of the Palestinian polity. So, in other words, China does not have a significant political role or security role in the region, doesn't want to have it as a matter of principle, and probably, certainly, would not be capable of having it, both politically and militarily, even though China prides itself on having good relations with all parties on all sides of the various disputes.
James, thank you. I think we have focused a lot on Saudi Arabia, but there are two smaller elephants in the room that we need to mention when we are talking about the current changing Middle East. There was a perception just a couple of months ago, and definitely during the Biden presidency, that the US is pivoting away from the Middle East. This, to some extent, was proven wrong with Trump's attention refocused on the region. However, it's very difficult to say that this is a trend for granted. So I wanted to ask you, how do you see the emerging role in this semi-void of power politics of Iran and Turkey?
Well, let me just start with saying, you're referring to Obama's pivot to Asia. The United States under Trump is not pivoting towards anybody, it's pivoting towards itself. So in that sense, we've seen a significant shift in US policy. I think in terms of in terms of the sustainability of a significant commitment by the United States to the Middle East, that has been enhanced in my mind by the visit of the Crown Prince to the United States last month. It's been enhanced because of the significance. I mean, artificial intelligence is the flavor of the day and is going to change much in the way we do business, both on a personal and on a professional basis. Critical minerals have become increasingly important, and therefore that alliance with Saudi Arabia goes beyond security, beyond all the issues that were called into question with regard to Obama's pivot to Asia. I think in terms of Iran, there's a divergence between the Israelis and the Americans. For all practical matters, if you wish, as far as Trump is concerned, Iran's been settled. he believes that the U.S. strike on Iran last June fully destroyed Iran's nuclear program. If the Iranians want to talk, that's fine. And if they don't want to talk, that's fine too. I think the Israelis take a much more assertive view. But one of the issues that arises in what we were discussing earlier in terms of shifts within the support base, and keep in mind that a year from now there are midterm elections in the United States. But one of the shifts involves the question of whether or not the United States should have gotten involved in Israel's war with Iran. I think what you're going to see in Iran is a generational shift, which means that and if you look at the next generation, including the leadership of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, there are people within that generation who want to be more accommodating, want to open up to the West, and there are hardliners. How that's going to balance out as Iran makes those transitions, I think we need to remains to be seen. In terms of Turkey, I think there's a very close relationship between Trump and the Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. In fact, if you go back to one of the earlier visits by Netanyahu to the White House this year, Trump turned around to him and said, "Look, if you have a problem with Turkey, I can resolve it. We are the best of friends with Erdogan." So I think that one of the litmus tests is going to be in all of this whether or not Trump overrides Israel's veto on Turkish participation in the international stabilization force that would be introduced into Gaza if we indeed get to a second phase of Trump's Gaza peace proposal or ceasefire proposal.
Thank you. Do you, as we go to Gaza, do you actually see any feasible solution to the situation in Gaza? Like, do you think any of the solutions that are on the table at the moment are actually really feasible?
I think there's a difference between feasible and what may be happening on the ground. There clearly is a feasible resolution to the Gaza conflict, and it's not rocket science. I think we all know what that is. Whether that's going to be what happens remains to be seen. I find it difficult to believe that Arab and Muslim states would want to engage in an international stabilization force that only operates in part of Gaza. In other words, at the moment, you have Gaza essentially split into two parts, and a part that is the western part that is controlled by Israel, and the eastern part that is more or less controlled by Hamas. Unless you have a clear agreement, not only with Israel but also with Hamas, on what the introduction of the international stabilization force means. For example, the issue of disarmament of Hamas. I don't see Muslim and Arab countries wanting to participate in a force that essentially would be enforcing an Israeli policy. Now, having said that, there are indications that there may be a compromise with Hamas. What's clear is that Trump, in a conversation with Netanyahu on last Monday, a phone conversation, made very clear that he wants constructive engagement by Israel in the implementation of his ceasefire proposal. We're also seeing indications by Hamas that it may be willing to lay down whatever is left, and that can't be very much of its heavy weaponry, maybe not its sidearms or AK-47s. And there's discussion within Hamas about how the group wants to position itself going forward. In other words, Hamas has clearly said that it does not insist and will not be part of Palestinian governance in Gaza in the immediate future. And there is some debate within Hamas about moving or emphasizing the group as a political movement rather than as an armed movement, although I think you'll continue to see lip service paid to the notion of an armed struggle as long as we don't see the creation of an independent Palestinian state.
James, you have talked about the Middle East, but let us move into your other comfort zone, which is Southeast Asia, and how it relates to the current Middle East. You are in the vicinity of the most populous Muslim nation in the world, Indonesia. Maybe it has been overtaken by India, but there are no statistics to prove that. Indonesia has figured very prominently in the ongoing struggle between political Islam and what is understood by many to be a moderate interpretation of Islam, with the very strong ties between the Southeast Asian Muslim communities and Arabia as writ large. How do you see the effects of the breakneck speed Saudi modernization? Do they undermine the religious percepts, or do they undermine the standing of Saudi Arabia as the beacon of Islam? And how would a country like Indonesia, with this huge Muslim population, react to all these stunning changes in Saudi Arabia?
Let me, if I may split the question into two parts. One is Southeast Asia and as a whole, and the Middle East. I think you have to differentiate. You have three Muslim majority countries in Southeast Asia. Indonesia, which remains by any definition the most populous Muslim majority state, with some 270 million people, Malaysia, and of course Brunei. So obviously the issue of Palestine has a very different resonance in those three states, as opposed to, for example, Singapore or Thailand, although Thailand has had somewhat more connection in the last 2 years because of the fact that a number of Thais were either killed on October 7, 2023, or kidnapped on October 7, 2023. In fact, the last body that was returned to Israel this week was that of a Thai national. And when it comes to Indonesia, Malaysia, let's focus on those two. Malaysia is an outlier because Malaysia has always had a formal relationship with Hamas. Hamas operates an office in Kuala Lumpur. It's not called Hamas, but it is the Hamas office. There was a brief crackdown last year when one of the Malaysian NGOs that was a fundraiser for Hamas was investigated by authorities, but nothing was really done. And Malaysia has not bowed to any pressure by the United States and others to close down the Hamas operation in Kuala Lumpur. By contrast, Indonesia has rebuffed any attempt in the past to allow Hamas to open an office. And in fact, Indonesia, in the current circumstances, has offered to contribute 20,000 troops to the International Stabilization Force. and finally, Indonesian religious leaders, particularly leaders from Nahdlatul Ulama, which is the world's largest, most moderate civil society organization with some 90 to 100 million followers. Leaders on a few occasions have actually visited Israel, and in one occasion met with Netanyahu. But then finally, I think, in terms of the relationship, you have Indonesian pilgrims, particularly Christian pilgrims, certainly prior to the Gaza war, visiting Israel on pilgrimages. Now, having said all of that, there's been sort of this pressure to moderate Islam, if you wish, ever since 9/11. And you've had interfaith conferences, you've had Muslim conferences emphasizing Muslim minority rights, and so on and so forth. But you have three key players in trying to define what moderate Islam may be. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Indonesia, with the government backing Nahdlatul Ulama. And what you see essentially is that both Saudi Arabia and the UAE define moderate Islam in social and in economic terms. With other words, a lot of the reforms that we've seen in Saudi Arabia since the rise of Mohammed bin Salman, but also seen in the UAE, are social reforms, whether they're focused on women, on minority rights, and they're driven both by politics, geopolitics, if you wish, but they're also driven by economic necessity. In other words, certainly in Saudi Arabia, if you are going to diversify your economy, empower the private sector, you can't do that if half of your population, namely women, are restricted. What the Saudis and the UAE have not done is liberalize politically. In fact, their notion of what moderate Islam constitutes is absolute obedience to the ruler. And that is where the Indonesians with Nahdlatul Ulama in the lead have differed. They envision an Islam that embraces pluralism, that embraces democracy, that embraces human rights. Now, they haven't always succeeded in their strategy, which was one with engagement with the vehicles of the propagation of Saudi Islam, for example, the Muslim World League, but also with engagement with far-right groups, including the RSS, which is the Hindu nationalist movement in India, from which Prime Minister Narendra Modi emerges. Nevertheless, this is a force that one cannot underestimate. It has tremendous international access, including the White House, including the corridors of power in Europe, including Budapest, by the way. It has a paramilitary force of 5 million people. It has economic and financial strength. It runs 18,000 religious seminaries or madrasas, several hundred universities. It has ministers of its associated party in government, both in the Prabowo government that's currently in office, as in the Jokowi government, which was the previous government of Indonesia. The one footnote I would put in all of this is that Nahdlatul Ulama is going through a serious power struggle. Now, the struggle is as much about power as it is about economic control. One of the things that the Jokowi government did, or that Jokowi did before he stepped down, was hand Nahdlatul Ulama the rights to a $1 billion mining enterprise. And that's obviously in a world in which critical minerals are important. That's quite an asset to have. And that's an asset many within the movement and critics within the movement of the current leader Yahya Stakuf, would like to get their hands on.
Thank you, James. I really appreciate a very extensive answer to my question.
Thank you. If I may, I would like to circle back to the question of Israel and Gaza. There's one thing that we have talked about prior to this discussion. How would you describe the changes in the Israeli military doctrine since October 7?
Okay, I think there are two factors here. Israel has moved since October 7 from a deterrence strategy to what I would call the military emasculation of its neighbors. You see that in southern Lebanon, which is why Israel continuously violates the ceasefire and demands that Hezbollah not only disarm south of the Litani River, which was always the most immediate area of concern to Israel going back to the 70s, but and you see that in Syria, where the first thing Israel did almost on the day that Bashar al-Assad was toppled was try and destroy the Syrian military infrastructure and draw a line beyond which, in other words, south of Damascus, the capital, draw a line beyond which Syrian military forces would not be allowed to operate. I think that's in part the response to the fact that Hamas was successful in breaching the border with Israel and carrying out what was a devastating and brutal attack. But parallel on that, I think you've also got to keep in mind that the demography of the Israeli military is changing. You have had since the 1980s the emergence of government-subsidized pre-military academies that are run by ultra-nationalist, ultra-Orthodox rabbis whose philosophy I can only describe as racist and supremacist. And up to 40% of the Israeli military's officer corps, certainly the army, are at the brigadier level or below, are graduates from these institutions. And that doesn't bode well for the future.
What changes in the Israeli military itself can you imagine in the foreseeable future?
I think we've already seen those changes. I mean, if you look at the past 2 years, at the way the Israeli military has conducted itself in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, supporting vigilante settlers, you're seeing that already play out. And there's no indication that that's going to change. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. The neighboring Egypt and Jordan appear to be willing to do anything to stay away from the Gaza conflict, from everything that concerns Israel and the Palestinians. How is this reflected in their domestic political dynamics?
I don't think it's a question of steering away. I think both Egypt and Jordan are extremely concerned because, as you know, what Trump did when he initially suggested that the Gazan population should be removed from the territory and that the region should be turned into a Riviera, he legitimized the notion of ethnic cleansing. And as a result, if there's going to be ethnic cleansing, sure, you may get some flights to South Africa or to wherever, and some states may or may not be willing to accept Palestinians. The bulk of the Palestinians would be pushed across the Jordanian and Egyptian border, and that would upset the demographic and political, well, the demographic balance certainly in Jordan, and the political balance in both countries. Egypt has essentially tried to address that issue by being a mediator and by wanting to be a major player in post-war Gaza. Jordan has done that by opening its territory for humanitarian aid to Gaza. But what you've seen in Egypt, you did not see in Jordan. With other words, and that again has to do with demography, Egypt has, for all practical matters, banned any pro-Palestinian expressions. Whereas in Jordan, you saw a fair amount of anti-Israeli demonstrations. And the reason of that, of course, is that Palestinians make up a minuscule percentage, far below 1% of Egypt's population, but they are half, if not more, of Jordan's population.
Thank you. Now, I would like to start pulling the audience into the discussion. We actually do have a colleague from Egypt right here, Dr. Aida Abderrahim. Could you please tell us your opinion on the Egyptian stance towards the Palestinians? And you're going to...
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Dr. James. It's very great having you with us here online. And I totally agree with what you said in terms of that we're not too far away from the crisis. We're not pulling out of it. On the contrary, we are so much concerned about it. Egypt has not wasted any efforts in the mediation for stopping this war. We had the Sharm el-Sheikh peace conference held in last October, even though it's not 100% success yet, but still it was like a step forward to stop and to have this kind of ceasefire. The other thing is with concerning the humanitarian aid. Egypt has tried several times to allow the passage of humanitarian aid inside the Gaza borders. Sorry about that. And it has been doing a lot of efforts, whether via the UN or via the Red Crescent, to send all of these humanitarian aid inside Gaza. And of course, opening the borders for all those who have been wounded and sick, and to absorb them inside and to welcome them inside. What is the main concern about Egypt when it comes to, in my opinion, of course, not to the, I don't know about the government, is that welcoming all the Palestinians inside Gaza, from Gaza inside Sinai, that's a big issue for us because of the economic pressures that we're going through. Egypt has been hosting up until now 10 million refugees and migrants from other countries, whether from Syria, from Yemen, from Libya, from Sudan. It has been ongoing, and this has been creating a lot of stress on the economy, stress on the people themselves. They feel that they are no longer at home. They feel that they are surrounded with other nationalities. Yes, we are a welcoming nation. We are Dunya, as we say it, the mother of all lands, but to an extent. When it comes to pressuring us and we're being kicked out of our houses because there is somebody else who's going to come and rent the house at a much higher rate, then we will say, no, stop it. When it's coming to that the essentials prices are extremely high, not just because of the loan that we have taken from the IMF, but also because all of these guests that are living with us, we'll have to say, no, thank you, stop it. We need to stop that. And of course, we had a previous traumatic experience with the infiltration of terrorists and Daesh via the eastern borders. So this is another thing that the Egyptian government is very careful about, and it's very much attentive to. It's not going to welcome everyone to be get inside. We don't know who's going to infiltrate. It's not just a matter of that we want Gaza for the Ghazian people. We also need to make sure that no terrorism will be coming inside the country. No terrorist attacks will happen inside our country, because for the current administration, they see themselves as being very successful with ending the war on terror in 2017. So opening up the gates means that more terrorism might infiltrate. We are not going to compromise on that. I don't know about the Jordanian side, but I had to explain it from the Egyptian side. So it's the economy, it's the security, it's the matter of some sort of feeling self-secured inside your own country. So this is my intake about this. Thank you.
Katarína, can I just add one short remark?
Absolutely, sure.
I think you're going to see a very crucial moment in how Egypt handles Israel's agreement to partially open the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza. As far as Israel concerned, and this is sort of trying to play into Trump's pressure on Netanyahu, it would be a one-way road. With other words, you can exit Gaza, you cannot return to Gaza. And it's hard to see the Egyptians going along with a policy that would prevent Gazans who went to Egypt to escape the war, went to Egypt for medical treatment or for whatever other reason, not that Egypt would go along with a border crossing that would not allow those who want to return to be able to return.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to add something to this issue? Thank you. James, I have one last question for you. At the end of October, there has been held a conference in Tel Aviv, bringing together representatives of various ethnic and religious minorities from across the Middle East. Israel is apparently trying to position itself as a protector of regional minorities, even though a number of the conference participants were not allowed to enter the country. How would you interpret these efforts in the light of Israel's actions on Syrian territory, be it the extensive support for the Druze community in and around Sweda, or the routine incursions into the Syrian border villages, or the frequent airstrikes, including the strike on the Syrian Ministry of Defense building in July? How do you interpret this entire puzzle of events? Thank you.
I think several things. First of all, Israel has long had a history of supporting certain minorities, at least, in the broader Middle East. You've seen that with the Kurds dating back to the 1970s when Mustafa Barzani, the legendary Kurdish rebel leader, was still alive. You've seen that in Sudan in the south, and in various other. Going back to the 1960s even, when the Israelis were supporting the royalists in the Yemeni civil war. The conference you're referring to last October was a conference of Syrian minorities. The participants, Alawis, Kurds, Druze, Yazidis, by and large were people who were in exile, who were not living in Syria. And therefore may have been just freer to embrace support by Israel, protection by Israel, than those that are living in Syria, even though you do see that embraced by certain segments of the Druze community in southern Syria. Israel has made clear that it wants to be the protector of the Syrian minorities. The Israeli foreign minister already earlier this year, Gideon Sa'ar, described the Kurds as Israel's natural allies. The Israelis have intervened in southern Syria militarily on behalf of the Druze. And you've had some Alawites in eastern, on the Mediterranean coast of Syria call for Israeli intervention. For Israel, this is not an altruistic engagement. Israel wants to see a weak Syrian state, or at least a federated Syrian state, in which various minorities would have autonomy, something that the Turks are fundamentally opposed to, primarily because they do not want to see another autonomous Kurdish region on their borders, and which potentially could put the Syrians and the Israelis at odds. I think one thing to keep, one positive thing in all of this is that Trump has clearly swayed his support and given Ahmed al-Shara full backing. He does not want to see an Israeli intervention in Syria. And therefore, there are limits on, presumably, at least for now, on what Israel as a protector of minorities in Syria can do.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to add something to this issue? Yes, Sam?
Thank you very much for this discussion. I have just a quick question. As you both talk about Iran and its role and its changing role, how would you see the future of Iran's engagement in the Middle East through the axis of resistance, or whatever you would call it? Because the argument is that the strategy is still there, the mindset of engaging in a wider Middle East to prevent conflicts within Iran's territories is still part of Iranian military doctrine and strategic thinking. But it seems that everyone is quite sure that it's because of the weakness of this axis, there won't be a future kind of alliances in this regard. So thank you very much.
Sure. Let me put it in a broader context, if I may. Iran, ever since the revolution, the occupation of the U.S. embassy in 1979, and subsequently, Iran has been, in some ways, if you wish, forced to develop an alternative or asymmetric defense doctrine, simply because because of sanctions, it did not have the ability to acquire the kind of military that it may have wanted to. Let's face it, for all practical purposes, Iran does not have an air force. And for all practical purposes, leaving aside fast, small boats that are very fast, it doesn't have a navy. And so I think that's where the importance of the reliance on ballistic missiles comes in, but also the building of alliances with non-state actors. I think add to that the perception, and it's not totally wrong, that the threat of an attempt at regime change has always been there. It ebbs and flows. Whether we're going to see a flow again remains to be seen. One of the things I noted in recent days was that Jaish al-Adl, which is a Pakistan-based group in along the Iranian border in Balochistan, has reasserted itself, at least in terms of statements, is forging alliances with Baloch groups on both sides of the border. Whether or not that signals that we could see another attempt at destabilizing Iran by supporting minorities in the country remains to be seen. I think in terms of obviously the axis of resistance has been severely weakened. Hezbollah has been severely weakened. Hamas has been severely weakened, at least militarily. There is a growing sense in Iraq, also among Shia groups, that they need to be careful and don't want to be engaged in a conflict that is not theirs. And the Houthis have their own priorities. So for all of those reasons, the axis of resistance has been weakened. I think one reason why you're still seeing an emphasis on the axis of resistance is not so much that there is this old mindset and that people are sort of stuck in the route of wanting that axis, but if you were to get a situation in which a foreign power, whether that's Israel, whether that's the United States, would want to rekindle unrest in Iran, particularly among minorities, then the non-state actors may be one way how Iran would want to respond to that.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Thank you. György?
Yes, well, James, I think we have exhausted you beyond all levels of decency, but I think we could go on and on, because listening to you is just fascinating. And I have to admit that I have this privilege time and again, because I have the precious WhatsApp number of James since the times when we worked together, and he was my mentor in Singapore. At the end, James, if you just forgive me, and if Katarína forgives me, I want to use you as a fortune teller, and because you have a vast pool of knowledge, and people so knowledgeable probably are closer to be able to predict the future as far as the Middle East is concerned. James, what do you expect? Are you expecting more turbulence, or maybe some sort of a return to calm and stability in the period to come? Thank you.
Well, I don't have a crystal ball. Let me warn you, it takes a lot more to wear me out. But having said that, let me put it this way. If I take what I believe is Trump's temperature at this moment, I don't think that Trump wants to see a major conflagration. And I don't think he wants to see one prior to the midterm elections, at least a major conflagration in the Middle East. Venezuela may be a different question. But I don't think he wants to see it in the Middle East, which means that you're going to see some sort of very shaky ceasefire at the very least persist in Gaza. It's going to take, even if Hamas were to decide that it wants to run a guerrilla war, a low-level insurgency, it's going to take it time to regroup and get its act together. Lebanon, I think the Israelis may have wanted a major offensive again, and it's clear that Trump has put his foot down on that. And by the same token, it's also clear that that Trump does not want to see extensive Israeli military operations in Syria. Now, unless you get a Netanyahu who's willing to go onto a collision course with Trump, and I doubt that, I think you're going to see some degree of non-hostility, if you wish, for the foreseeable future. But I wouldn't put a timeline on that.
Let me say Amen.
Okay, thank you very, very much. I believe our time's up. James, I can't thank you enough for being with us this year again. And I really hope you can join us at our next conference again next year.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure and an honor.
Very much. Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure and an honor for us too. Thank you.